Matt Schaff and Jared Small of DraftSharks.com here to get you ready for your Week 12 waiver wire runs. And Jared, we spend most of the season fishing for upside candidates from the waiver wire in our leagues. And we're not abandoning upside now, of course, because we want upside every single week in our lineups. But I think the further we get into the season, the closer we get to the end of the season, specifically, pickups become just as much about filling needs, about chasing utility, as they are about finding upside. Now, if you get to a certain week and you've got a spot to play with or a player you no longer need, whatever, buying upside is fine. Pick a player who looks like he might become something. If he doesn't, you drop him. But a lot of us are fighting for playoff spots or just trying to set up our rosters for the fantasy playoffs. So I think it becomes at least as important to find the players that specifically fit what you need. And that's not just about who you're picking up, but I think it's also factoring into who you decide to drop and maybe whether to drop somebody at all. The example that kind of brings us to mind for me is Tank Bigsby this week. He shows up in our waiver wire article this week as a suggested drop. Doesn't mean everybody has to drop him, but we're at the point now where if a running back is more frustrating than helpful, then go ahead and drop him and don't worry too much about what he might do for another team. What do you think about Tank Bigsby individually and then just that idea in general?
I'm the guy that always tries to hold on tightly to like all running backs, but I think Bigsby's droppable in a lot of cases. Just in what world are we going to feel good about this Jaguars offense the rest of the season? And Bigsby's a guy who needs positive game script to be someone we can count on in fantasy lineups. So definitely droppable. We haven't officially announced this yet, but I know we just launched our revamped free agent finder, which will help you with not only the ads each week, but the drops as well. You know, whether you're looking for a 1 week fill-in or, you know, upside for the rest of the season. And what you're looking for should also depend on where your team's at, right? If you are battling for a playoff spot, then the current week is most important. If you're sitting with only, 1 or 2 losses and kind of gearing up for the playoffs already, then you can be looking more towards not only those playoff week matchups, but also just, stashing upside running back handcuffs where, if something does happen to a starter, that handcuff running back would become a, fantasy starter for you.
And Tank Bigsby not only came up in our article, not only a player that I dropped from a team within the past 2 weeks, but also came up with one of our customers on Reddit where he said he was looking to pick up Trey Benson, asked if he should go ahead and drop Jordan Mason, also mentioned though that he has both Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby on his roster. And I said, first of all, I think it's okay to drop Jordan Mason for Trey Benson because this team does have James Conner, and I would rather have that handcuff than somebody else's handcuff. But I also said I'd rather just drop Tank Bigsby, keep Jordan Mason, and add Trey Benson because even if Travis Etienne goes down in their next game, as you just said, I'm not sure I'm going to want to start Tank Bigsby. Maybe in their, I think it's a week 14 matchup with the Raiders. That right now looks like the only spot where I'd feel good about starting Tank Bigsby. And even then it depends on what your other options are. Whereas if I drop Jordan Mason today and Christian McCaffrey gets hurt this Sunday, Jordan Mason's an instant starter again.
Yeah, for sure. I would rather have Benson and Mason than either of those Jags running backs. Now, I would drop Bigsby for ETM, but I think being able to avoid that Jacksonville backfield the rest of the way is probably your best bet.
Yeah. Now, let's get out of the Jacksonville backfield because people have decisions well beyond that. Let's hope. But we're going to stick with that chasing utility idea, and that's going to start with quarterbacks and figuring out which one makes the best pickup for our team this week. Jared, it looks like the top 2 quarterbacks in terms of waiver decisions this week are generally, obviously it's going to differ by league, but generally we're looking at Anthony Richardson, we're looking at Drake Maye. So start by telling me what I should like about Anthony Richardson coming out of week 11.
And I've gone back and forth on these two guys, which one I'd rather add. I do think it's close. I think Richardson's the more volatile asset, but I think it has an even higher ceiling than Drake Maye, who we know has a pretty nice ceiling. He showed us already. Yeah, a lot to like about what Richardson did last week. He earned an 80.3 PFF passing grade last week. That was easily a career high. It was 7th best among all quarterbacks on the week. Richardson completed 67% of his passes. That was his career high in a full game. He had an 88.5% adjusted completion rate, which, throws away sacks and batted balls and throwaways, that type of stuff. That was 3rd best on the week. So by pretty much any metric, this was Richardson's best passing performance as a pro. Maybe the Jets defense just sucks. That's another takeaway I think we should have here, like what they allowed to Kyler Murray 2 weeks ago and then Richardson here. So that's something to keep in mind when the Jets come out of their week 12 bye here, but definitely positive for Richardson as a passer. And then of course we also got the 10 carries the 2 rushing touchdowns, both of those came inside the 5-yard line. So you like to see that the Colts, willing to let Richardson carry near the goal line. Also, 8 of those 10 carries were designed runs for Richardson. That was his second most designed runs in a game this season. So that's, I think, what we can count on more going forward. I'm still not ready to put any level of confidence in Richardson as a passer. I'm open to it, right? Maybe these couple weeks off changed something and helped him. Maybe he's going to be better down the stretch. But I think if we can continue to get the 8 to 12 carries per game with the goal line work, that's why Richardson was getting drafted in the 5th or 6th round this summer is for that rushing ability. I think if he can give us that on a consistent basis, he can be a borderline quarterback 1 the rest of it. Again, it's going to be volatile. I think he's going to have some more bad games, but I think he already has 2 top 5 quarterback weeks this season. I think he can give you 2, 3 more of those if things go good for him.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the thing about the Jets defense is that now among their past 6 games, that's 4 top 5 quarterback weeks against them. Josh Allen, Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, Anthony Richardson. In between, they got CJ Stroud with nobody but Tank Dell around, and the Patriots, but in a week where Drake Maye left that game early. So suddenly, it doesn't play into this week because they're on bye, but it's going to be a defense that we need to think differently about going forward. It's absolutely nice to see Anthony Richardson deliver fantasy points in his return to the lineup, especially because, we're wary of him at this point after the way he played earlier this year. I still prefer Drake Maye between them. And the why is pretty simple. He's had 5 full games. I mentioned the one against the Jets he left early. The other 5 games, he's finished QB8, QB7, QB12, QB15, QB12. You could certainly argue that Anthony Richardson has the higher fantasy ceiling. He maybe does, probably does, even with the way that he's capable of running. But Drake Maye only has 5 full NFL starts and has finished no lower than QB15 in fantasy in any of them. So that feels pretty good at this point. He adds some of the rushing, has been enough passing to support that. So I feel pretty good about picking him up. I feel pretty good about his matchup this week.
Yeah, I prefer Maye this week, although I do think it's close. Richardson gets the Lions, who have been a really good pass defense for a while now. Now you do expect Richardson's dropbacks to be up in this game. The Colts are, I think, like 7.5 point underdogs right now. So that helps. But I think I wouldn't be shocked if we're looking back on Monday and it's like a total bomb passing performance from Richardson. That's the scary spot. I think the Dolphins defense, I'm kind of considering it a neutral matchup at this point. I know they've limited fantasy scoring so far by quarterbacks, but as we talked about, a lot of that was in those games without Tua when the games were just kind of ugly, low scoring affairs because the opposing offenses didn't have to do much against Miami. So Maye and Richardson have kind of like middle of the road remaining schedules beyond this week. I think they both have some decent spots. Both of them have some tough matchups. They also both have week 14 buys still. So you got to keep that in mind. So they're both really nice pickups this week and guys who are going to be, at least hovering around the top 12 in our rankings for multiple weeks the rest of the way. But neither is a guy I'd want to be counting on as like my every week quarterback 1 the rest of the way.
Yeah, and I still worry a little bit about that Detroit matchup where the Lions have not allowed more than 1 touchdown pass to any quarterback so far this year. So he might work out, but certainly not a safe spot. Super flex leagues only. Let's talk about Tommy DeVito stepping in as a new quarterback for the Giants. He's not particularly good, but we did see DeVito across 6 starts last year, 5 of those that he played the whole way. He finished top 20 in fantasy in 4 of those weeks and averaged 32.2 rushing yards across that span. So, I mean, we talk about that floor that the rushing yards provide. That, I think, makes DeVito a better fantasy option than we would give him credit for. Again, super flex only, but you got any interest here?
Yeah, super flex. I mean, like you said, he had the top 20 finishes. He had a quarterback 7 finish thrown in the mix. He's kind of a poor man's Daniel Jones, right? Like you don't really want to rely on the passing, but the rushing is going to be there. He does have Malik Neighbors. That helps. And he has a good matchup this week as well. Tampa Bay, 24th in pass defense DVOA, 31st in adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks. Tampa Bay is much tougher against the run than the pass. So yeah, I don't think they're going to want to let DeVito drop back 40 times, but there's definitely a chance he does if the Bucs get out to a lead here, especially if they get Mike Evans back. So not comfortable, would not mess with DeVito as a quarterback 1, but in super flex 2 quarterback leagues, there's definitely upside for him to help you for as long as he's under center. We'll see. I think there's a chance we do see Drew Lock at some point this season, but for as long as DeVito's in there, I think he can help you as a quarterback too.
And if you want DeVito to make an appearance at your pizza place, make sure you get in now before he becomes a star again. The price is going to go way up. On to running back. And Jared, same kind of question as quarterback. It's a matter of deciding who your favorite target is among the guys available. Top 2 guys mentioned in our article, Roschon Johnson, Cam Akers. You particularly interested in either guy or clearly favoring one over the other?
I favor Roschon Johnson, but I'm not like super excited about either of them. I wouldn't go drafting like any of these high upside handcuffs we talked about, a Trey Benson, a Braylon Allen. Like I'd be stashing those types still over these two guys. I do prefer Roschon. Again, this was the first game for the Bears under their new offensive coordinator, Tom Brown, and Roschon Johnson set season highs with 44% of the snaps, a 29% carry share. He got 42% of the Bears running back carries. I don't think the shift was as big as it looks on paper, though, because 5 of Roschon's 10 carries were in short yardage situations, which he had sort of been getting that work anyways. It was still 37-9 in early down snaps in favor of DeAndre Swift. So he was still the clear early down back here. Roschon got the short yardage stuff, which is helpful, right? I mean, he's getting those goal line carries. If you do need him, like especially in non-PPR, like he is a decent touchdown bet. Johnson also continued, I think, to play most of the passing downs and 2-minute drill stuff. So he's that, goal line back plus passing down back, gives him some fantasy upside. But so I think you're looking at a guy who's going to get 6 to 10 touches per week. So it makes him really fringy. I know we still have 6 teams on bye this week, 6 teams on bye in week 14. So he could be useful as a bye week fill in those 2 weeks. Otherwise, I think he's more still just a DeAndre Swift handcuff.
Yeah, mostly that, but the bye for the Bears is behind him, has been getting some valuable work, as you mentioned. And it would make sense to me if this team leans a bit more toward the running backs going forward. Their rookie quarterback has been struggling. Thomas Brown's a former NFL running back. He's a former running backs coach under Sean McVay. This game was the 4th time this season that the Bears ran the ball more than they threw it, and the 2nd time since their week 7 bye. So that's 4 games. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get a bit more of this kind of lean and just a bit more work for the backfield. Like you said, I prefer Roschon Johnson over Cam Akers. Not excited about either guy, not going out of my way to chase them. And I mean, as far as anybody else, we've both mentioned Trey Benson already. He's still available in 69% of sleeper leagues, 78% of Yahoo leagues, and 82% of ESPN leagues, Jared. So despite all our hard work on the Trey Benson front, he remains far too available and somebody that I would certainly pick up ahead of both of these running backs.
Me too. Another guy I think I might pick up ahead of both of them. Maybe. I don't know. I guess I haven't thought it through all the way, but Jalen Wright I wanted to bring up again, who for the 2nd straight week played ahead of Raheem Mostert on early downs. Mostert's doing some of the passing down stuff, but Wright's kind of overtaken Mostert as, the number 2 ball carrier for the Finns. Mostert briefly left that game last week with, I think it was a hip injury, ended up coming back in, but we'll see. He's an older running back. He's had a ton of injuries. If Mostert misses time, I think Wright could become a fantasy option at the level of Roschon Johnson, probably even better than Cam Akers. And then, if something happens to Devon Achane, I think Wright would take on an even bigger role.
Just imagine how interesting he would be back when Miami used to run the ball and wasn't throwing it to Jonnu Smith all the time.
Yeah, right.
Over to wide receiver, where we don't have much to discuss, but we do need to talk Elijah Moore. And I got to say, I did not expect Jameis Winston and the Browns to support all 3 of their wide receivers plus tight end David Njoku, but they absolutely have through Jameis Winston's 3 starts. That began in week 8. Since then, Jerry Jeudy ranks wide receiver 11 in expected PPR points per game. Elijah Moore ranks wide receiver 12, and Cedric Tillman ranks wide receiver 15. All 3 of them have gotten at least 8 targets in all 3 of Jameis Winston's starts, and that's without leaving David Njoku behind. He's tight end 9 in expected PPR points over the same span with no fewer than 7 targets. So we saw against the Saints, this team can't run the ball anymore, apparently can't play defense anymore. So they're going to be trailing in plenty of games. They're going to be throwing a lot. So if it's 8+ targets for all you guys every week, then go ahead and pick up any of them that's available and feel free to use them.
Yeah, we shall be thankful for Jameis Winston bringing this passing game to life for us. The targets have been super evenly spread over the last 3 games. Jerry Jeudy, 30. Elijah Moore is next up with 29, Cedric Tillman, 28. So that's basically, spread evenly. Elijah Moore's average target depth, it was 5.4 yards before Jameis Winston took over. It's up to 13.2 yards with Jameis. So he's not even just this, short range guy anymore. He's really just getting similar usage to Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman. Moore still not playing in 3 wide receiver sets, which to me still makes him the 3rd Browns wide receiver here, but it's a lot closer than I think we thought it was going to be a couple weeks ago. The Browns do have the toughest remaining wide receiver schedule, and most of that is in these next 3 weeks. They get the Steelers, the Broncos, and then the Steelers again. After that, it's Kansas City, City, Cincinnati, Miami. Those final 3 games, I'm not worried about any of those matchups at this point. The Chiefs' pass defense has not been as good over the last month. I think that's a fine spot. And then Cincinnati, Miami are fine spots. But really, as long as this type of volume continues for Elijah Moore, 7, 8, 9 targets per game, I think you can consider him as a wide receiver 3 at least.
Yeah, I mean, what does it even mean that they have negative matchups, that Winston's going to go 28 out of 50 as opposed to like 30 out of 44? They're just going to throw the ball even more and trail in those games. Like I said, not a whole lot else at wide receiver, but I think one question is any Patriots receiver that you're interested in at this point?
Low level interest, like well behind Elijah Moore. Kayshon Boutte and Kendrick Bourne, I think, are the 2 guys. Bourne was the one that popped up for a nice fantasy game this past week, scored the touchdown in the loss to the Rams. And that was after he was either a healthy scratch 2 games ago or was active and didn't play a single snap. Got back into the rotation this past week. Kendrick Bourne did. Still ran just a route on 50% of the dropbacks, though. Kayshon Boutte has been running a route on like almost every single dropback for the past month now. Boutte's seen exactly 6 targets actually in 4 straight games. So I would still lean towards Boutte over Kendrick Bourne, but I mean, they're both like wide receiver 4s to me. I don't really want to count on any receiver in this Patriots core right now.
I agree with that, but at this point in the year where we've got 2 weeks of 6 teams on bye within a 3-week span, certainly plenty of teams looking in that range for starters at the position. And I think the Patriots are a team that provides intrigue at that level, because whereas one of these guys with the numbers that they're getting, the opportunities they're getting would be like the wide receiver 3 on most teams, it's a wide receiver 1, which increases the chances of getting meaningful targets in this game. That's why I favor Kayshon Boutte over Kendrick Bourne as well. As you mentioned, the 6 targets in 4 straight games, also a much deeper ADOT than either Bourne or Demario Douglas. That plus the steadiness of Boutte's role gives him a chance of that spike week in any one of these games.
And Douglas is still the top guy to own here. I'm not even sure what his owned rate is on Sleeper or ESPN, but I would still lean towards him as the top guy here. He's kind of been not even the most consistent target getter, because he's had some down games as well, but he's had the games of 7, 8, 9 targets. I think he's the guy I prefer in this wide receiver core.
What about tight end? If I need somebody for this week, who's your favorite pickup on waivers? And it could be because of this week's matchup or because he just looks like somebody who can help you the rest of the way.
This is one of the best waiver weeks at tight end I can remember in a long time. Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, and Will Disley are available in over 50% of fantasy leagues right now. I think they all have potential to be top 12 fantasy scorers the rest of the way. I honestly don't have like a strong lean of which one I prefer. I think the guy I feel most comfortable starting on a weekly basis is actually Hunter Henry. Henry leads the Patriots with 66 targets this season, a 19% target share. He's actually been a bit better than that in Drake Maye's 5 full games, averaging 7 targets per game in Drake Maye's full 5 games, 5 catches per game, 53 yards. Henry's 7th among tight ends in expected PPR points per game with Drake Maye. Now he still has a week 14 bye, so you got to factor that in as you're making your decision here. The 5 remaining games though for Hunter Henry, obviously omitting week 18. The only negative matchup is week 17 against the Chargers. He has 3 neutral matchups. He has a plus matchup in week 13 against the Colts. So at least for these next 4 Hunter Henry games, I'd feel pretty comfortable having him as my tight end 1. Maybe the upside's not as big as Jonnu Smith or Will Disley's, but I think Henry gives you a higher floor than those guys.
I agree with all that. Not a strong lean, but I favor Hunter Henry over the other guys. Since Drake Maye took over the starting job in week 6, here's how Hunter Henry ranks among tight ends: 12th in target share, 8th in air yards share, 8th in receiving yards per game, 7th in first read percentage, 8th in expected PPR points per game, 11th in actual PPR points per game. So that tells me there's even a bit of scoring upside versus what he's been doing, which has already been top 12 level tight end production. So I feel pretty good about putting Hunter Henry in my lineup every week. And, part of that is that wide receiver situation that we just talked about, where nobody's exciting. That can only help the team's lead tight end on the receiving front. If you're like, nah, I like Will Disley because he plays with Justin Herbert, that's fine. If you're like, nah, I like Jonnu Smith because he's on the Dolphins and he just scored 2 touchdowns, that's fine. Slight lean for me to Hunter Henry for a weekly target floor.
Yeah, and plenty to like about these other guys too. Jonnu Smith's actually been the most productive from a fantasy standpoint among these 3 over the last month. He's 8th among tight ends in PPR points per game over the last 4 games since Tua returned. Now, Jonnu does have the 7th toughest remaining strength of schedule for tight ends. That includes 3 straight negative matchups from weeks 14 through 16. So that's kind of the downside with Jonnu Smith. Will Disley, he's 12th in expected PPR points per game over his last 5, 10th in actual PPR points per game over his last 5. We talked about the Chargers last week, just the schedule for them the rest of the way. Both good matchups and just facing good offenses where they're going to have to play in higher scoring games, as we saw on Sunday night in that game against the Bengals. And, Disley's next two matchups are against Baltimore and Atlanta. They're neutral tight end matchups, but again, those could both be higher scoring games. And after that, he gets positive matchups against the Chiefs and Buccaneers. So Disley to me is right there with the other guys. He, I think, has just as high of a ceiling as Jonnu Smith, maybe not quite as safe as Hunter Henry, but I think he's right there. I think especially these next few games, if they're high scoring games for the Chargers, Disley could be really strong.
Let's close this out with some defenses for the next 2 weeks and maybe beyond. I said last week I was picking up Houston not only for that Dallas matchup, but also this week against Tennessee. Certainly going to go ahead and roll the Texans if I got them. And this is why we look ahead, Jared, because now they are 80% rostered on Sleeper. When we did this last week, Houston was 28% rostered. So very available at that point, not nearly so available this time around. Who you got for week 12 for anybody who doesn't have Houston as their defense?
Let's just run it back with the defense facing the Cowboys, and that's Washington this week. And like Houston, the Commanders get Tennessee next week. So I actually prefer the Bucs as a starter this week, but because of the fact that Washington also gets Tennessee next week, I'd lean towards them as the pickup. But the Bucs get Tommy DeVito, and the one thing we didn't talk about with Tommy DeVito is his 17.2% career sack rate. To put that in perspective, Daniel Jones's career sack rate is 8.5%. The number of sacks DeVito took in his 5 full games last year: 5, 9, 6, 0. That was Packers. I have no idea what Green Bay was doing there. And then 7 in his 5th game. And the Bucs are already tied for 8th in the NFL in sacks this season. So I think the Bucs are, to me, an even better play than Washington this week. But I think Washington's a really strong play, high floor against the Cowboys. And again, Washington gets Tennessee next week.
And both of these could offer you multi-week help. Washington, you mentioned, gets the Titans after Dallas. The Bucs go from Tommy DeVito to at Carolina in week 13, and then back home for the Raiders in week 14. You're not going to want to play the Bucs in week 15 against the Chargers, I don't think. But after that, they're at Dallas in week 16 and then home for Carolina again in week 17. So you could pick up the Bucs, play them this week, and hold them for the rest of the year and just get a second defense on your team to face somebody else. And, whoever has the best matchup in week 15. I think the Bucs could be usable every other week potentially.
Yeah, for sure.
One other thing to do at this point in the season is check to see who your league mates have dropped, because the Broncos, for one, are down to 52% rostered on Sleeper as of Tuesday morning. Obviously, that's still, above half, but that's one of the better defenses around. Strong outing against the Falcons this past week. And now the Raiders and Browns are up next. So that roster rate's going to be much higher at the end of this week. So it's at least worth checking to see if they're available in any of your leagues. Similarly, Chiefs are down at 61% coming off that matchup with the Bills, and 3 straight kind of meh scoring weeks, but they're at Carolina this week, home for the Raiders next, and also at Cleveland in week 15. So just generally check and see.
And I was just going to mention the 2 defenses. I think, now is the point of the season, or at least maybe once we get beyond this week with the 6 teams on bye. We have no teams on bye in week 13. Like, don't be afraid to roster 2 defenses if their schedules match up where, you're going to have a positive matchup between the 2 every single week the rest of the way.
Yeah, I would not punt tight end to carry 2 defenses, but if I have the spot to use, I would try to stash that second defense right now, play the matchups the rest of the way, because especially at this point of the year, anybody in your league that's still in it is also going to be looking at the matchups even more than they might have before.
You have my permission to drop Dontavian Wicks or another wide receiver like him for that second defense at this point of the season.
There you go. It's all we were waiting for. Check out the trio of waiver articles we put out there every week. Of course, the main waiver wire pickups has offensive targets, bid recommendations, and drop recommendations. The IDP waiver pickups have a fair number of pass rushers as well as linebacker options this week. And then there's the streaming defense guide from Shane in case you need a 1-week fix at that position. And no matter what you need, the free agent finder is ready to help. Just this week, as Jared mentioned earlier, it got upgraded even further. It is now even easier to see who make the most sense as specific pickups available in your league to help your specific roster. You don't have to go by these general things that we're saying on the show or the general words in the article. We keep working on tools and articles like those and putting out videos like this because we want Draft Sharks to be your unfair advantage.